became problematical.
I must say that this is the darnest way to conduct an interview with
Ultimately, none of the 8 Scuds that landed proved to have chemical warheads. After some discussion, Baghdad had decided the Israelis might retaliate against a chemical attack with nuclear weapons.
Now, we would like to see that threat removed, and we will take the actions that are necessary to remove it. I cannot tell you when, I cannot tell you where, I
أكيد
cannot tell you how.
بأن قسما من الصواريخ
Some of the Scud missiles were loaded with chemical warheads, but they were not used.
إلا أنها لم تستخدم وبقيت
They were
إلى
kept
ما
hidden
بعد
throughout the
الحرب.
war.
سبب عدم الاستخدام كما
We didn't use
أشرنا
them
هو
because the other
توفر
side had a
الأدوات
deterrent force.
المتوفرة لدى الطرف المقابل.
The man who would decide what happened next was Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir. He and George Bush disliked each other, and when Bush telephoned him, Shamir angrily told the president that if America couldn't stop the Scuds, the Israeli Air Force would.
Bush said to Shamir, pleaded with Shamir, tried to cajole Shamir that Israel not take any military action, that this would be injurious to the cause to the Allied cause, that in the final analysis this would also be injurious to Israel's cause.
This was not a warm and close and fuzzy relationship. But yet, for this one period, they communicated. And maybe because they hadn't been all folksy and friendly, it was almost more real because of it. And it was very, very straight, very honest, no flourishes, no frills. But I really think they got through to each other.
I think in such situations, you have not to play with words. It couldn't be a moment of diplomatic discussions and debates. And well, I explained to him, it's very difficult, Mr. President, it's very difficult. I don't know what the day of tomorrow will bring, but at this moment, we will act accordingly, accordingly with your concepts.
Israel became the president's top priority.
We were going to be redoubling our efforts in the darndest search and destroy effort that's ever been undertaken out in that area, and I hope that is very reassuring to the citizens of Israel.
Washington's approach to the Scuds was purely a political approach. My approach was purely a military approach.
As I told you before, I think Scuds are militarily insignificant.
In Riyadh, Schwarzkopf rebelled against the new emphasis on Scuds. He wanted to use his Air Force to win the war, not placate the Israelis.
As you know, the total Scud launches have been...
No one in Israel was ever killed by a Scud missile. They did have some people die as a result of putting their gas masks on wrong, but no one was ever killed as a result of Scud missiles.
From my perspective, from the strategic perspective, and the president's perspective, and obviously I was doing this with the president's approval, it was vital to keep the Israelis out of the conflict. And that the way you did that was to make certain that they knew we were doing everything humanly possible to deal with that Scud threat.
Well, General Schwarzkopf thought that many of these people who had these easy answers about how to solve the Scud problem were a bunch of pointy-headed politicians who had never fought their way out of a wet paper bag.
Cheney overruled Schwarzkopf. Aircraft started to crisscross 28,000 square miles of desert, looking for perhaps 14 mobile Scud launchers. The pilots couldn't find the launchers or the Iraqi convoys bringing in more missiles.
I'm going to have General Glosson come back up here and show you some film that I think will speak for itself.
Through the help
2 weeks into the Scud campaign, Schwarzkopf was finally able to show some results.
Let you look into the night sky of Iraq as we are attacking mobile Scuds. And now the pilot is maneuvering to drop laser-guided bombs on this target. There are a total of 11 vehicles in this area, and all of these are already loaded with Scud missiles. As you can see, these have already been fired.
Washington and Langley in Virginia, the CIA headquarters, this was being watched on CNN, as it was everywhere else. And the CIA analysts looked at it and they said, oh my God, those are oil trucks. And elsewhere there was even a suspicion that they may have been milk trucks. As far as the American public was concerned, they remained Scud launchers. They were never told otherwise.
But there was another way to hunt Scuds. British Special Forces, the SAS, were operating deep inside Iraq. Schwarzkopf distrusted Special Forces, but the SAS commander had persuaded him to make an exception.
There had to be people on the ground. The human eye cannot be replaced by technology. We were well armed, we had good strength, we above all had the desert as our friend to retreat and hide into. We were told in very categoric terms that our priorities 1 to 10 were Scud, Scud, and nothing but Scud.
For 43 days, the SAS patrolled the Iraqi desert closest to Israel. They called it the Scud Box. This is the only known film of an SAS column. It was taken by the gun camera of an American helicopter flying in to take back a prisoner. Within 2 days of the SAS arriving, there were no more Scud launches from the Scud Box. Columns like this destroyed radar sites, microwave towers, and cut communications cables. When they saw a Scud convoy, they attacked it.
On the 4th of February, we had a column that encountered a Scud convoy. They knocked out one missile. The engagement then lasted, I think, something about 4.5 hours. A young officer eventually called in the F-15s to take on the other targets.
Be aware that there are my friendly forces, 8 vehicles total in the open, 500 meters north and west. Your original target was 3 launchers plus associated vehicles by the burning light. Bombs away, bombs away.
But it was a huge desert, and the Iraqis simply moved their mobile launchers far away from the SAS's Scud Box.
Now we're going home.
America had rushed Patriot missiles to Israel and Saudi Arabia to shoot down Scuds. In the skies above Tel Aviv and Riyadh, they dueled with the incoming missiles. The Patriots got as close as they could and detonated, filling the air with shrapnel. The Patriot became a symbol of resistance, damping down the pressure for Israel to join the war.
Patriot is 41 for 42. 42 Scuds engaged, 41 intercepted. I view it as an honor to be here, to come to Raytheon, the home of the men and women who built the Scud Busters. We're very, very proud of you.
The Israeli government thought all this was nonsense. The Pentagon was claiming a kill every time a Patriot exploded near a Scud, and the Israelis simply didn't believe the American figures. On the ground in Tel Aviv, experts from the Israeli military analyzed the damage every time a Scud fell to earth. What they discovered was kept top secret so as not to inflame Israeli public opinion.
When I met President Bush in Washington, we had some human argument because he was convinced that Patriots were doing a great job. I told him that at the very best, the intercept ratio maybe was 20% intercept probability. He asked me what I meant by that, and I said that maybe out of every 10 Scuds Patriots try to intercept, they might succeed with 2. But in retrospect, I was overstating the case. I think that probably not a single Scud was intercepted by a Patriot.
When the Scuds started falling, the Americans didn't realize that they were in fact breaking up as they were re-entering the atmosphere. The Patriot would see not only the warhead falling, but pieces of fuel tank, pieces of missile that were disintegrating. And the Patriot was designed in such a way that its radar would lock on an incoming object and fire 2 missiles at that object. Well, that's fine if you see 1 warhead coming in. It's not so fine if you see 6 or 7 pieces of junk coming in.
It was only after the war that Israel and the Pentagon acknowledged the limitations of the Patriots. As the air war continued, the British RAF Tornadoes were taking a beating during bombing raids over Iraqi airfields. The Tornado pilots were trained to fight a war in Europe, to surprise enemy defenses by flying low. But in the desert, these tactics left them vulnerable. In the first week, 4 Tornadoes were lost, 1/4 of the coalition casualties.
Out there it was burning blue. I mean, it was probably 8 o'clock in the morning, at 8:30, and it was blue sky and the visibility was 1,000 miles.
We were flying at maybe 60 or 70 feet and about 500 or 600 miles an hour, and there's this huge explosion and a flash, and the aircraft was hit by a missile.
Well, I had blue above my head. Suddenly the desert was above my head and it was just tumbling. I was going, eject, eject, and John said, don't bloody well eject, don't bloody... And I was going, eject. And eventually I just grabbed, we have the swing wing, obviously, in the Tornado, and I threw the lever forward, and the aircraft righted itself.
I couldn't see the back of the aircraft. All it was a ball of fire, and the fire was spreading its way down the spine of the aircraft towards me.
And then you say, this aircraft is going no further. And then you go, give me the ejection drills, you know.
It's actually half a second between pulling the handle and being thrown clear of the aircraft, and that half a second's like a lifetime.
And then it's as if someone, a huge giant, just grabs you by the shoulder, yanks you up, and I remember my head going forward.
And then there's the crack as the canopy opens, and you're left in your parachute. And it's deathly silent.
And then you realise how big the desert is. Then we saw some Iraqis coming towards us.
You could sense the anxiety and unease throughout the body politic. Gosh, it's been going on for a week. Why isn't it over? Maybe it's not going well. What are we trying to do? And we had not been sort of on stage to explain what we were trying to do. So I went up to see Secretary Cheney and said to the Secretary, we've got to do something because this is, we're starting to lose the public on this one.
The Secretary will have a short statement.
Many of the military commanders involved in Desert Storm believed that the press had been a prime contributor to the loss in Vietnam, that the press, by negative reporting, tended to undermine support for the U.S. military at home.
Our strategy to go after this army is very, very simple. First, we're going to cut it off, and then we're going to kill it.
Powell had a more sophisticated view. He recognized that the media was, for one thing, a very important part of his arsenal, because you can win the battle and lose the war through television.
As a measure of effectiveness of how we're doing in the air campaign, I just pull these 2 things out. I've laundered them so you can't really tell what I'm talking about because I don't want the Iraqis to know what I'm talking about. But trust me, trust me.
It was a telling moment, an American general saying, "Trust me," and getting away with it, a measure of how far the Army had traveled since Vietnam.
I think it showed that we had reached a point where American military had gained a level of credibility again with the American people and the press. And although there may have been members of the press who were skeptical about trusting me, the American people at that point were willing to trust me.
A week into the war, the air planners still believed that by bombing Iraq, they could deliver a decisive victory. The air campaign was still focused on Iraq's infrastructure rather than on the troops occupying Kuwait. But Saddam was determined to sit out the bombing. Officially, Saddam was not a target. But the Allies launched 260 missions against sites where they thought he might be hiding. Eventually, spies reported Saddam slept in private houses, changing location every night.
You can find out perhaps where he has been. You can find out even where he is. But what you need to know is where he's going to be, because you must mount an attack. And so it's almost an impossible task.
فمثلا لعل من الغرابة أن
You might find it strange, but the president of the Republic of Iraq was sometimes driven around the city in an old taxi.
ومن الغريب أن نقول
It's strange
بأن
but true
صدام
that Saddam
يتنقل
also used a
بسيارته
lorry
من
to move around the city.
هذا
These are some of the
من
measures he
ضمن
resorted to.
إجراءاته الأمنية.
The Air Force kept searching. These Iraqi television pictures showing Saddam in an American-made Winnebago launched more missions.
When we saw him sitting in a Winnebago, we went after the Winnebagos with a vengeance, and whenever we saw one or tried to find one, and whenever we saw one or two or three, we would attack them as quickly as we possibly could.
The closest we came, we had a report that there was a convoy one night, a very, very large convoy moving down a road. We then attacked that convoy, and it's my understanding that we hit the vehicle in front of his and the vehicle behind his and killed the bodyguards in it and didn't touch him.
A week into the air war, Iraqi troops opened a Kuwaiti pipeline that flooded the Gulf with oil. The oil endangered the desalination plants that provided Saudi Arabia with drinking water. But the plants continued to work, and a bombing raid cut the flow of oil. Saddam was already planning a bigger move.
His strategy, of course, was to bleed the Americans and cause an outrage in the United States and a reaction which would lead to a negotiated settlement of the war. Well, he had to have Americans to bleed, but there were no Americans bleeding. So he hurried up his time schedule by, if they won't attack us, we'll attack them.
Saddam ordered his forces to attack a Saudi border town called Khafji.
وقال صدام أسروا لي اقبضوا لي على 4 أو
Saddam said,
5,000
capture for me 4,000 or 5,000 American, English, and French troops, and we'll use them as human shields.
أبدان أي ظهر الدبابات ونتقدم
We'll tie them to our tanks and overrun the Saudi oil wells.
في هذا الحال لا تستطيع الطائرات
If we do this, the Allied jets won't attack.
مهاجمة دباباتنا حفظا على أرواح جنودهم.
That evening, U.S. Marines sent an unmanned spy plane on a routine flight over southern Kuwait.
What do we have Holy here? Crow. Let's see what they are. Man, this is something. Whatever they're towing, it's got 4 wheels on it. I don't see any tubes coming out. AA, perhaps?
As the drone beamed back television pictures of the Iraqi advance, Marine helicopter pilots waited for orders to attack. But the orders didn't come.
We'd been on the landline back to our wing headquarters, letting them know what was going on. We started, a million and one scenarios began running through our minds on, why in the world would they not be letting us launch on these vehicles?
Guess what? Closer, closer. And 2,253 hours. They've crossed the border. Crossed in Saudi Arabia. King Fahd's going to be pissed. Fahd baby's going to be pissed. He's going to be hot.
For an hour and a half, the Marines waited for the airstrikes to begin. But at Air Force headquarters, they were concentrating on their strategic campaign. At first, they simply didn't see the importance of the Iraqi advance.
Where's our air? This is ridiculous. Frickin' bomber couldn't ask for any better target than that.
Why was the Iraqi advance not stopped prior to Khafji? A very straightforward, simple question deserves a very straightforward, simple answer. It was not the Air Force's best day.
But the Iraqis, too, had miscalculated. Khafji had been evacuated. The only people there were 2 Marine reconnaissance patrols hidden in the town.
I got the team together and I said, we've been practicing for some of us 5 years to play in the big game, and now here we all of a sudden get a chance. I think we ought to stay. And they agreed.
You're the only
people there, yourself and another team of your buddies somewhere else in the city.